last-minute shake-up at 5:30 a.m., laundry situation not good. And when your focus is on helping your clients, it's easy to forget about yourself. But NASM knows trainers.
Morning, Ryan. It's okay.
And staying in front of the day isn't always as
Thanks,
simple
Ryan.
as 1,
What's
2,
up?
3. So when the unexpected has you pressing pause,
What's the latest on creatine?
I'm going to get back to you on that.
let NASM 1 help you press play. Visit NASM.org to sign up for a membership today.
You're listening to Random Fit with hosts Wendy Batts and Ken Miller, winner of a Gold Markham Award for Digital Media.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this week's episode of Random Fit. I am Wendy Batts here with my friend and co-host, as always, Ken Miller. Ken, how are you?
I am great, Wendy. Thanks for asking. How are you?
I am doing very well.
Good.
Today's episode, we are going to be talking about Rhabdo. Rhabdomyolysis is the full name, but everyone calls it Rhabdo because, as you can tell, it's quite a mouthful if you call it by its full name. There's been a lot of information, especially in 2024, about Rhabdo. So we are going to talk about how to avoid the risks of this and also talk a little bit in detail of what exactly Rhabdo is. So Ken, why don't you kick it off and tell everyone, when people are talking about Rhabdo, what does this even mean?
Yeah, unfortunately, it's been a situation that's come up, and it can be lethal when it comes to how you train and when you train improperly. So basically, what rhabdomyolysis, as you said, Wendy, it's a pretty big mouthful. It's a breakdown of muscle tissue, and when the muscle breaks down, it's a releasing of proteins called myoglobin, and which is normal. It's just there's a lot of it, more than what the body can eliminate at that point in time. So the after effects or the side effects or the effects of these vary, and we're again in context there. It's usually done when there's an intense bout of training. There's other factors that we'll go into it, but when there's an intense bout of exercise, the muscles break down excessively, releasing the myoglobin. And then when you have let's see, just so I make sure we have it all down, the myoglobin, it overruns what the kidneys have to filter out. So this is where the damage to the kidneys and kidney failure come into effect. So when we talk about rhabdo, ultimately, this is what's happening. You just have excessive muscle breakdown. Myoglobin is released into the blood system. Your kidneys, they're trying to filter out all the byproducts, as it does naturally. But there's just so much that the kidney is overwhelmed. And then that's where the risk of kidney failure comes into play. And that's where the risk of death happens as a result of these intense bouts of workouts.
And it's interesting because, when we talk about working out, we always talk about the NASM OPT model and how it's systematic and progressive. Well, this is super important. And this is obviously something that wasn't taken in consideration. And because of, so we're going to talk about some of the things that we have read about with some major universities and the changes that on a collegiate level, they're taking into account. But think about the symptoms. Like, what are the symptoms of Rhabdo? Well, first, weakness. You're definitely going to notice that your body is super sore, muscle pain everywhere, their weakness. But a big key is also dark urine. So that's due to the myoglobin. So if you notice that, they'll tell you when you use the restroom that your urine should be almost like water, not necessarily, maybe a tint of yellow. That's usually healthy. When it's above that and starts to turn more of a tea color. No, I can't believe we're talking about urine, but here we go. More of tea color, then that is a sign that you are becoming dehydrated. Obviously, you'll feel nauseous, you have fever. Sometimes people get delusional or very confused. And if as Ken, you mentioned, if you start to notice all of these symptoms, especially at once, it means that obviously the myoglobin is at high levels. And if you don't take immediate action, could lead to kidney failure.
Yeah, and the saying I like to work off of, Wendy, is P. Chablis. It's just a little. I learned that from my buddy John out in the East Coast. But
There you go.
well, just to give you a reference of what a normal bathroom session should look like, that's what it is. But when it's dark, then that's when you're like, okay, either I'm very, very, very dehydrated, which happens just, I mean, without exercise, induced rhabdomyolysis. But if you're very, very dehydrated and it's very dark, you look at dehydration first, especially if you're not tying it to an extreme bout of exercise. But when there is that bout of exercise, then that's where you have to really consider that there is something going on. But for all the other symptoms that you mentioned, Wendy, there's weakness, there's pain. Okay, there's pain in that area, and there can be some discoloration under the skin as well. So definitely things to watch out for, especially if you're an exerciser, you've just had a very intense bout of whatever the workout may be, and we'll talk about those workouts in a little bit. But just to keep in mind that you can be at risk if, again, you're witnessing that, plus there's a exercise session that you can tie it to that was on the more extreme side of things.
And living in Arizona for so many years, you have a higher risk when you live in very hot climates. And those of you guys that have followed the news or have looked at Phoenix record-breaking highs, especially over the summer, when school starts back in session and you start to get your teams together, if you're working in really hot and humid outside conditions. Now, again, Phoenix isn't usually humid. Atlanta is very humid. However, it's extremely hot there. If you have athletes that have been on a break and they're all coming back together, back in the day, now I know I'm old here and I'm going to date myself. When we would work with our coaches, we would start as hard as we possibly could. There's no gradual, like, we're going to do this. We're going to see where you are, what kind of shape you're in, what you did over your break, and see what we need to do to get you ready for whatever sport we were going to do. So you look at taking an athlete that may be deconditioned or out of training because they didn't do things in the off season and then putting them in higher climates. That is also one major way for someone to get rhabdo. And that's certainly, as a coach and teacher or working with any type of athlete, if you're going to do outside work, this is something you definitely want to take in consideration, because people get very dehydrated quicker. And in Phoenix, sometimes people don't sweat. It's like it evaporates and they start to salt. I was a salty kind of girl personally. And so you just need to be very aware and watch your athletes very closely to ensure that you don't start noticing some of this. And if so, the number one thing to avoid is dehydration. Make them drink water, make them drink something with electrolytes, because that's going to be extremely important.
Yeah. And when you and I were first talking about this and doing the research and going back and kind of recollecting, in high school, we had a spigot and a hose and maybe a Gatorade, container. And we were, as soon as the coach called a break, go get some water, we just all ran. It was who got there first. And it was just, it was a show. But these, I mean, and you think about it, it's like, when would I have heard of a case of rhabdo when I was younger? And this is why this is such a, I don't want to say enigmatic topic, but something that I didn't see this back in the 80s, right? But now when you talk about the intensity of, well, one, the heat, but the intensity of competition and the culture of, okay, we have to win, and you combine both of those things plus modern exercise techniques that you can take to another level. Actually, unfortunately, too hard, too intense for what some people are capable of doing. But it's the culture of, okay, we got to set the pace now, because as the season's about to start, we need to get the mindset that, win at all costs. And unfortunately, it takes its toll physically on those that are not prepared. So,
well, how about this, Ken? I'm sure you've heard of this. No pain, no gain. If you're not first, you're last. Those are certain things we would hear all the time, and nobody wanted to be last. And so I know multiple times I ran track in high school, along with a couple other things, but we would run and run and run, and we would run till we puked, and then we would run some more, and then we would run again. And then it's like, well, you didn't finish within this time and you ran it faster the last time. I want you to walk this and run it again, run it again. And I mean, that's just using track as an example. And this, of course, was outdoors. So there were probably cases of mild rhabdo that maybe we didn't have the title for, or no one really knew what to look for at that point. So I was thinking back, same thing. It wasn't that, oh, this person, I mean, we've had people pass out. So, and they were like, well, you're just out of shape. You need to go home, think about it, and come back tomorrow, and we're going to do it again. And now looking at all the research, like you said, that was not the smartest idea for this coach. Now, we didn't die. We didn't get hospitalized, but it was one of those, we have to get you in shape. We have our first competition and first meet coming up within the next month, and we have to get you guys ready.
Right. And it does take some time and consideration. Now, with all the science that we know now, as far as preparation for especially preseason, this is where we can start to take precautions and build better habits, especially with, again, there are rules and regulations that are in place now that weren't before. But just to talk on that hydration piece, and Wendy, you brought it up with electrolytes and preparing for, just physically preparing for that exercise bout, having your hydration ready. And again, we know that it's not just about having water, it's about having the crucial salts that are a part of what we would look at as far as electrolyte drinks today. So making sure that you have the salts, the potassium, the magnesium, the sodium, because that's what you lose when you sweat. And the example being extreme weather, being hot, and a lot of times 100 degrees or more in in a lot of areas of the country, but making sure that you're properly hydrated, not with just water, but also with electrolytes. So watching your sugar intake, obviously a concern for a lot of us, but if it's an intense bout of exercise, 25, 30 calories worth of sugar, not a big deal because you're going to spend it no problem. But we want to make sure that you replace the electrolytes that you lose through sweat. So electrolyte drinks are very, very important when it comes to preparing, again, getting ready for the actual, but this is not just while you're in the exercise session, but this is the preparation 1-2 hours before you go outside, before you put on your uniform, before you get ready for practice, making sure that hydration is taken care of before you even get outside. Did I mention the word before?
I think you did.
This is before. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Before is a good word. And I pulled this with some of the research that we did, Ken, and this stood out when it was talking about electrolyte imbalances. And if it says dangerous shifts in potassium and calcium levels can lead to heart problems, including arrhythmias and cardiac arrest. And I know that we've seen more and more kids, younger kids, that are having heart issues after doing extreme workouts. Some that have to go immediately and get tested. There's a lot of talk out there of why something like that could happen when they never got diagnosed with any kind of heart issues before. So it's just interesting to see now some of the things that we're seeing. And then after reading this, it's like, wow, maybe they had a mild case, or maybe it was something that because they have an electrolyte imbalance for whatever reason, or they've been running too fast or running too far, or going past the limit of where they should be going. I think it's one of those times where you need to step back and say, okay, what is it that I'm not doing? And to your point before, making sure that you are properly hydrated, but then also doing a proper warm up is going to be extremely important. And Ken, you and I talk about recovery and warm ups. And I know when I was younger, again, this was way back in the day, but I didn't warm up. My warm up was, okay, if I'm going to run, I need to go and run a mile before I get started. Or, oh, let me do my hamstring calf stretch before I go and do this. Or we were getting ready to do a cheer competition. We didn't warm up. We had to get into the splits. We had to do this, that, the other, and nothing like foam rolling, statically stretching after doing a proper assessment, doing activation exercises for proper alignment. None of that was ever discussed. So we're coming hopefully full circle of knowing what we need to do with our athletes. But
You mean for baseball, it's not run foul pole to foul pole? And
oh, they do when they don't listen. That's
what it is.
punishment. That's not your warm up.
That's your warm up. Yeah, we had basically 2 laps around the track when we ran track. That was a warm up. A couple skips here and there, but that was it. So you're listening to us here, both Wendy Batts and I, Ken Miller, on avoiding rhabdo. Rhabdo risks is what we're talking about on Random Fit. But before we go forward on more information on this topic of rhabdo, I want to read a little bit of announcement here and let you guys know that this episode of Random Fit is brought to you by NASM 1, the membership for trainers and coaches. Members enjoy unlimited access to hundreds of career resources. Get the Edge app to schedule and program clients. Enjoy half off all certifications and specializations. Access free CEUs and more. All this for just $35 a month. Go to nasm.org/membership to learn more about NASM 1. So when it comes to rhabdo, Wendy, well, I guess a lot of the underlying points that we're making so far is about preparation. And when we talk about, again, this has been mostly about the context has been getting ready for fall sports. So school ends in May and June. You have June, July, August, the athletes start to return, and then that's when they just put the pedal to the metal. And it's what you do from June to August really is what can dictate your preparation as an athlete. So I remember when I was still doing strength conditioning at Cal, the one thing I would send off with all the athletes, whether it's softball, golf, gymnastics, was a summer workout sheet. And 9 times out of 10, this is something that they admitted to me, that we didn't do it. We were doing this. I was playing golf. I was doing this. I was leading camps, but the summer conditioning plan wasn't done. And I didn't take any offense because it's ultimately their bodies. But once the fall came, then that's where you realize that I should have worked out. I should have done something to keep my body in somewhat of good shape when it comes to being an athlete. So that's something we can't emphasize enough, is just you can't take 2.5 months off of conditioning when you're a collegiate, professional, amateur athlete, competitive athlete at any level. So maintaining a constant level of fitness and conditioning, not just the skill set for the sport, but you can't take a couple months off. And again, I think we're talking, Wendy, here more to the student athletes out there, right? They're coming back in the fall.
Yeah. And what kind of made Ken and I decide to do this topic was there was a lot of information that came out just this year with Tufts University lacrosse team. And if you didn't get a chance to do or read the news or even watch television, it was televised all over about several of the lacrosse athletes and their preseason training. And they came back to school and they had strength and conditioning coaches working on their programs, and they were just back from school. And it started raising questions because the intensity of that training camp was higher than it should have been. And so therefore, these several athletes ended up with rhabdo and hospitalized. And it wasn't one of those things where it was just one person or 2 people. It was several of the athletes. And then it brought all this scrutiny into what are they doing and what is going wrong. Since that time, which I think is fantastic, one of those things where unfortunately you have to learn the hard way, is they now have, meaning the coaches and all their staff have to undergo very specific annual, so not just let's do it once and move on, training, looking for the signs of rhabdo, ways to prevent it. And now they also have to have mandatory hydration breaks. They have specific guidelines on their coaching and conditioning sessions. They have a detailed warm up for whatever kind of workout they're going to do. And I think when you're starting to look at, well, why didn't I do this before? The question was maybe they didn't know, maybe they didn't realize that their athletes were that out of shape. But it's really unfortunate that they were that deconditioned, and that the coaches, while they were putting these athletes through these grueling training sessions, and they were back to back. It wasn't that they just did it once and this happened. It was multiple times, lack of hydration, lack of recovery, and they just weren't listening to their athletes. And it's really unfortunate event. However, now they have very specific guidelines to make sure it doesn't happen again. And because it was nationally announced, there are a lot of other universities that are following the same protocol, to where now they even take their training programs and they have to be improved or approved, which I think is fantastic, by the medical staff as well. This is what we're going to do when we bring them in. Do you see anything wrong with the intensity? Some of this will be outdoors, some of this will be indoors. And this is kind of how often we're going to do these types of workouts. I think having everything should always be as one, and there's always a disconnect. There's a disconnect sometimes between the athletic trainers and the strength coaches and the ADs. It could also be with the medical staff. And so getting everyone on the same page and getting everyone involved is the best way and the most successful way to keep your athletes healthy, but also to make sure everyone's in the know of what they're doing and why.
And a lot of people don't realize that a lot of this insight and oversight, I'll say that, started, well, a while ago, let's say 15, 20 plus years ago, when you had cases of specifically football players that were passing out and actually dying of heat stress, heat stroke from intense workouts, extreme heat, and dehydration. And that led back then, when it came to identifying heat stress and having the athletic department take a closer look. Okay, well, what's our sports medicine team, the athletic trainers, doctors, whoever's on the sideline there, who are responsible for the health and well-being of the athletes, to make sure that they're not put in a situation where, okay, well, they're running so many sideline to sideline drills. The conditioning is under these heat conditions. Who's there to identify when an athlete is in danger, right? So they'll have the team, the staff, be more aware of, okay, well, this guy isn't looking so good, we should have him sit out. So we first saw this 15, 20 years ago, when they started having incidences where athletes were suffering from heat stress and hospitalized, and unfortunately in a couple cases around the country, a few cases there where they were actually died. And we're seeing the same situation now with Rhabdo, because you've addressed the heat situation. It's not hot outside, it's in the 80s or in the high 70s. Let's do this. They might contract somebody to come in, perform these workouts because of their accolades in their profession. And unfortunately, a lot of these things do not translate as far as what they're ready for, but the structure, the support that's in there now is because we've had these situations where they were unsupervised. It was on the whim of the coach, unfortunately. And I'll say that the coach was in a bad mood. They just wanted to set the standard, set the pace, set the culture. And unfortunately, these athletes eventually pay for it with their health in that hospitalization. But now that the NCAA has looked at, okay, well, what processes are in place, and they said, well, this can't happen, and we don't want it to happen again. Unfortunately, you can't guarantee that, but if you put the safeguards in there, hopefully you're going to limit those situations. But to incorporate, to your point, Wendy, the sports medicine staff in the early identification that somebody is under duress physically and they should be taken out, that's one of the best things that they can do, especially now that it's not just about heat, it's also about the intensity of the workout that can lead to rhabdo.
100%. And I think it's also important, if you start to see signs and you're not sure, the first thing you want to do is stop the activity. Just stop it completely, because it can escalate very quickly. And I think that's one of the things sometimes we think, oh, this is going to happen over time. It is not. If you start to see someone start to become very confused, or like you said, they need to sit down, they're complaining about cramps or muscle pain, stop the exercise. Second, it's going to be hydrate. It's going to be extremely important. And third, seek medical attention. This is going to be really important. Get the medical staff involved, because they may need an IV. They may need something right then and there. The medical staff can do that usually without even having to go to the hospital. They usually have that there. And then, of course, taking some time. One of the number one things, Ken, we were reading, and this always comes back to this, where I'm like, I need to do better at this, is sleep. An athlete that is performing at that high of level needs at least 7 to 9 hours of sleep every single night. That's when the body's going to heal itself. That's when the muscles are starting to repair itself. And so people that are, especially in college, lacking sleep for whatever reason, and dehydrated for whatever reason, and then start to go back out in the heat and then performing these very high intensity exercises, they are setting themselves up for failure versus doing the opposite. So just know that sleep is also very, very important, as well as making sure before you go into this workout that you're properly warming up. Get your body ready for whatever it is that you're doing: foam rolling, static stretching, dynamic stretching, and then whatever workout you're going to do. If you prep the body, it won't go into complete shock from going from nothing to 100%. There needs to be that gradual work into whatever you're going to do at a high level. And you also want to make sure too that the programming makes sense. I say this, NASM programming is always something that I love, because we start at different phases. We don't just go from off the couch to 100% power. We want to make sure that we are working our bodies, our muscles, and we're controlling the movement quality and patterning to get up to that level. But it takes time, and you have to be able, as a coach, to schedule out the right timing to ensure you can get them to the highest level they need to before competition safely.
Progressions, and we talk about it all the time. Progressions. There's an activity, there's a demand for the activity. The body has to meet that demand to perform that activity, but it's about coordination. It's about using the right muscles at the right time, and that takes preparation. So you have to work your way up to the demands of whether it's sport or physical activity. And something, again, I just want to make sure that the context of what we're talking about with avoiding rhabdo risks is, it's not just an athlete thing. It's in the context of, there are people that have physical jobs, like construction workers, military. We've talked about military and the demands on the military when it comes to their uniform, the tasks that they have to do, the heat. They're in the desert, they're in the jungle, they're everywhere, from the standpoint that they have to be able to operate in different conditions. So this is where the military and as a construction worker, if you've got steady work, your body's going through it all the time. But just in the context of rhabdo, it's not just an athlete condition for overtraining. If you're dehydrated, underslept, and you're a construction worker, you're on a site, it's very hot, you've got the hard hat, you've got heavy uniform for safety. And the military, same thing. We talked about, they can carry up to 100+ pounds in their gear, food and supply, water. There is a specific demand in what they do. So this is where, again, it's not just an athlete thing. It is basically anybody who's under duress physically. So just so we're all on the same page on who is a candidate for rhabdo, and we just can't forget those jobs that have physical demands on it.
Well, you basically summed that up pretty well. I mean, avoiding rhabdo risk. This is what our whole Random Fit podcast has been about. And hopefully we now know and understand that the excessive myoglobin in your blood, in your body, is going to lead to possible kidney failure. It's going to make you sick, delusional, dehydrated. There are so many different ways to avoid these risks. Just think about what is the right move. If you're a coach, don't hire someone that is the top and the hardest person and come in and be like, oh, this is a drill sergeant and they're going to get you in shape. That's not the best way of working with your athletes. I do think that tough love is a big thing, but you also want to make sure that it's smart. Dehydration is a thing. And we know with an imbalance of electrolytes that can cause our body to go into shock. We can have heart issues. Again, with rhabdo, kidney issues. There's so many negatives of going in too hard, too fast, too quick. And so just be prepared to bring your athletes in, or if you are an athlete and you're working with a coach that's pushing you too hard, you need to talk to your coach. That's one thing that I have heard as somebody working with different teams. They sometimes are nervous about talking to their coach because they don't want to have the coach yell at them or scream and everybody else is doing this. Why do you have to be the one that stands out? But I think just acknowledging how you're feeling, making sure that if you're starting to feel nauseous, you're starting to feel like you're going to pass out, you've got extreme muscle pain, those are signs of rhabdo. And so you want to make sure to avoid those. But Ken, when we started reading all that about Tufts and that it just recently happened, I think it's one of those, when we started kind of going down the rabbit hole, we would call each other and be like, hey, did you see this example about, Oregon or all these different teams and different things that have happened? It's out there. It may not be all over the news, but there are many, many cases of this happening. But hopefully now that it's been brought to everyone's attention and getting people all on the same pages, this will stop becoming such an issue.
Yeah. Because it is a health issue and because you can die from it, it's one of those things that hits the news cycle, Wendy. And this is why I really wanted to talk about it here, is because it hits the news cycle and then 2 weeks later it dies. Strength coaches will talk about it, parents will talk about it with their kids, but then it goes away until the next event, because we saw 2011, 2017, 2024, and those are the cases that hits the news because they're in such high profile situations. But rhabdo happens on different levels, right? It's a scaled thing, and it doesn't have to be that you get hospitalized, but somebody goes to the bathroom once and they see it's very dark. That could be it, but things clear up and then you just kind of push it aside. But just understand, I guess the big point here is that there is a preparation for it. It doesn't have to happen. It's rhabdo. It's a multifactorial situation. It's not just the exercise intensity is the biggest blame, or gets the biggest blame, but sleep, hydration, electrolytes, preparation, stay in shape if you're going to do an intense workout. I think you summarize it well. And I think as long as you walk away, you listeners here of Random Fit understand what it takes to stay safe and take those steps, and you're going to have that much better of a intense workout if that's what you're going for. So Wendy, thanks for your insight. I appreciate you sharing what you've learned about rhabdo and avoiding the risks. And thank you, listeners of Random Fit, for being with us on this episode. If you liked what you heard today, like, follow, subscribe, download, share it. But more importantly, if you want to hear other things in the future that you want to hear us talk about, both Wendy Batts and I, Ken Miller, comment, email us, let us know what you want to talk about, and we'll have it on a future episode. So until next time, everybody, take care and be well.